Today is the 16th day in our Advent story, and this is December 14th. This is Monday of week 3. So yesterday we left off where Ishtar saw the star, but it was leading them into the wilderness of death. This is called desert. The whole camp mumbled and whispered and kept glancing Ishtar's direction as they loaded the camels in the dark. The young prince couldn't make out all the words, but every so often he'd hear, "We shall all be dead in 3 days," or "No one has ever taken this route and lived," and "Salamar shall kill us on this world, on the word of this small boy." The words hurt Ishtar, and he began to think maybe he hadn't seen what he thought he'd seen. Just before the caravan started out, he found his father at the front of the line. "Father, I am thinking that, perhaps my eyes were tricked into seeing the star. Perhaps I didn't see it after all." Salamar stared at his son for a long moment and then said, "Ishtar, I must know this for certain. Did you or did you not see the star?" Ishtar hung his head and thought, that brought an instant reaction from his father. "Ishtar, why do you hang your head in shame? Have you made the pause to dawn? If so, tell me now so we can fix it." "But," he said, softening his voice and lifting his son's eyes up to see him, "if you truly did see the star, then I must know that as well." Demons were fighting a war inside Ishtar's head. He thought he had seen the star and was sure of it at the time, but all the voices whispering in the night, all the doubts that now crawled around inside his head, what if he was wrong? What if people died because he'd made a mistake? Suddenly, Ishtar snapped his head and looked at his father. "No," he said loudly, "I am absolutely certain." Salamar nodded. "Very well then, it is time to go." The 2 bells rang out and the caravan lumbered into motion. Ishtar waited until his own file reached him and he began walking next to Musa. There was no talking, no singing, no laughing. The entire caravan was silent except for the footsteps. Even Kazim and Varda were especially quiet and glum. In a few hours they reached the Euphrates River. Salamar made the dangerous decision to keep moving cross it in the dark. So he sent the soldiers on horseback ahead to form 2 lines across the water, each soldier holding a torch in his hand. With Rasad in the lead to keep the camels moving, the entire caravan crossed the river between the 2 lines of light without an incident. On the other side of the river, the camels kept moving while all the people filled every bag and every pitcher they could find with water. Then they started the steep climb up to the rocky plateau. Ishtar was riding Musa now and looked ahead at the vast nothing in front of them. A bright moon shone above the clouds and he could clearly see as far as the horizon a half-day's ride ahead. Other than rocks just big enough to stumble on, there was nothing. No hills, no boulders, no plants, not even many snakes or lizards. He saw only one scorpion scurrying across the sand the whole first night. The sun rose right above the high clouds, and Ishtar thought he was surely roasting on a spit over a fire. It was hotter here at sunrise than on the worst afternoon of the first part of the journey. Kazim covered him in his dark blanket, but it didn't help. The hot air seemed to blast up from the ground and consume him. And the sun had only been up for 5 minutes. Musa would only take 5 or 6 steps before Ishtar's mouth felt shriveled like a date, so he'd take a sip of water. 5 or 6 steps later, he'd have to take another. "Slowly, my prince," Kazim said. "You must ration yourself against death. We will pass no water for the next 5 days. Ishtar watched a drop of water fall from his pouch. It evaporated to nothing before it could even hit the ground. An hour after sunrise, the 2 bells finally rang and the caravan stopped. This time they didn't bother forming a defensive circle. No bandit would be foolish enough to travel this desert, Kazim said. Varda served bits of salt with the morning millet. "Salt will make me thirsty," Ishtar protested. "But the heat will make you dead if you do not eat it," she answered. Ishtar looked at Musa and wanted to give his friend some water, but Kazim and everyone else kept warning him that the water was only for people. The camels would have to take care of themselves. No one had the energy to properly set up tents in the heat, so they propped them up on sticks, making just enough shade to sleep under. There being no danger from raiders, Ishtar and his guards gathered under the shade of Salamar's tent. It was good to sleep next to his father again, Ishtar thought. But there was very little sleep that day, especially when the camels began to lie down on their backs and roll in the dirt. They cool themselves in that way, Salamar said to his son, but it seems even they are feeling the heat. There also would be no horse or sword or arrow training during this part of the trip, his father had declared. Night finally came, but still the sky was hidden in clouds. No matter, Salamar said, they could not delay even an hour to see if the star appeared. They had to cross this desert as quickly as possible or die. Somehow Rasad managed to keep the caravan pointed in a straight line across the nothingness. For 5 days and nights it was the same. The sun baked the caravan all through the day. At the night the clouds held in the heat and hid the star from view. By the third day everyone's lips and faces were dry and cracked like the shell of a coconut. Inside Ishtar, the fear that he had been wrong grew bigger every moment. On the fourth day, the camels complained more loudly when loaded and walked more slowly once moving. Somewhere in the middle of the night, they began to moan, and soon a loud chorus of camel moans filled the desert. They are running out of water, Ishtar's camel puller said, and Ishtar noticed that the humps of the camels were becoming smaller and flabby. One more day and they'll die. Ishtar desperately wanted to give Musa a drink, but he learned by now it was important to obey his elders, who knew much more about these things than he did. Then a shamal wind started to blow, hot and full of sand. It blew so hard Ishtar couldn't even hear the camels moaning, nor could he see past Musa's head. The sand blasted his blanket and he didn't hold his head just right. If he didn't hold his head just right, it blasted his face as well. All through the night and into the next day, Ishtar trusted that somewhere ahead of Musa there was a camel puller leading the file. On the fifth night, as the sandstorm continued, Ishtar knew he would not make it alive across this evil desert. Rumors had been passed through the wind, rumors about a woman who went mad and tried to bake a bread on the rock, but it had burned before she could eat it. Rumors about a man who had been blown off his camel and was lost forever somewhere out in the sandstorm. Rumors of camels falling down dead, and Salamar said that one might actually be true. Just before sunrise of the fifth morning, the wind finally stopped blowing and the sand settled out of the air. And there, directly in front of them, low in the sky, but shining brightly, was the star. Ishtar had been right. A short time later, they seemed to be coming to the end of the world. The black line of the horizon drew even closer with nothing beyond it. Then the sky began to brighten, and soon Ishtar could see it was not the edge of the world after all. It was the edge of a cliff, and beyond it, a beautiful green valley. They had made it. As they drew close to the cliff, the camels started getting restless, trying to buck off their loads. Within minutes, they were all crying loudly and pulling at their ropes. Quickly, the camel pullers yelled, "Get off your animals!" Everyone, including Ishtar, did just as the camel pullers worked frantically to untie bags and bundles and saddles. As soon as they were free, the camels all ran ahead and plunged over the edge of the cliff out of sight. Ishtar walked to the edge and looked over. There below them was a giant lake, blue and cool and clean. Ishtar, like many others, fell to their knees and wept. Rasad has worked a miracle, he decided. He is truly an amazing man. It took another hour for the people to make the trek down the steep canyon path, and Ishtar wished he were safely riding Musa. But he understood that Musa had gone without water for 5 days in terrible heat. You cannot stop a thirsty camel once it smells water, Kazim had told him. When they reached the lake, everyone dove in with all their clothes on. They spent the entire day swimming, washing clothes, laughing, and feeling alive again. Throughout the day, Ishtar overheard people talking. "I guess the young prince was right," he heard, "and Ishtar knew what he was doing all along," some said. That afternoon, the camel pullers gathered all the animals and took them back up the ridge to fetch their loads. After a day of rest, Salamar ordered the camels to be properly dressed now that they were out of the desert. Worn blankets and frayed ropes were replaced with fine Persian rugs and gold braids. For the next 2 nights, the star led them north around the lake. "And what a lake it is!" What lake is this?" Ishtar asked his father as they rode, he on Musa and his father on his horse. "It is called the Sea of Galilee." Ishtar thought a moment. That is Greek. It means to put your trust in someone. I wonder who these Jews are going to trust. On the second morning, Ishtar was sitting by the fire, then stood and turned to see the scar-faced salt buyer he had embarrassed walking quickly toward him, a sword in his hand. Ishtar screamed and jumped back as Kazim jumped forward and drew his own sword. The man stopped and looked from Ishtar to Kazim and then down at his sword. "Oh, sorry," he said, and dropped the sword. "I was cutting fresh palm branches and decided I could wait no longer." Ishtar was silent, unsure what the man was saying. The salt buyer cleared his throat, then coughed, and then finally forced himself to speak. "I came to apologize, my prince, for my behavior in Zelzil, and to thank you for forcing me to face my own sin. I have thought much about your words in my own heart since then, and I decided I did not like the man that I was. These last days you have proven yourself a strong and courageous young man. In the future, I will keep these lessons in my heart." The man bowed and then said, "In any case, I thank you." He turned and picked up his sword and walked away, leaving a stunned Ishtar standing by the fire. Kazim sheathed his sword and said, "Takes a strong man to admit his weakness." As the caravan traveled around the lake, it passed several small towns in the night and a bigger town called Capernaum. "Can we stop and enjoy some good meals?" Ishtar whined to his father as the sun rose. "Patience," Salamar kept saying. "The best is yet ahead of us, a place where they make the finest pickled fish in the world. It is for this that my mouth waters." Ishtar scrunched up his nose at the thought of pickled fish and decided it must be something only old people like. "Not true," said Salamar. "It is a rare delicacy. From Teriche, they ship barrels and barrels of it to Rome and Byzantium and all around the world." What?" Ishtar asked. "Teriche," Salamar answered. "It is a beautiful village on the edge of the lake. And there it is." And that's the end of today. "You cannot stop a thirsty camel once it smells water," Kazim had told Ishtar, and it's true. Camels can go for a time without water, even in the desert, but when they're desperate, nothing can stop them once they smell the water. Too often, that's how we Christians are with Jesus. We wait until we're desperate before we turn to him. As long as our lives are going fine, we don't mind being on our own. It isn't until something goes wrong, when life seems overwhelming or we're running on empty, that we realize we need Jesus. At that point, we'll go running back to him. And that's okay. When things go wrong, our first act should be to call on God for help. He is always there. But wouldn't it be better to never get to that point? Wouldn't it be better to have a healthy drink of Jesus every day, so you never get quite that desperate? Jesus thinks about you and seeks out your friendship all day, every day. Maybe that's why he called himself the living water. I'll see you tomorrow.